everybody. Welcome back to Barely Filtered. This is a solo episode today. My favorite. No, I know that a lot of people do like the solo episodes. For me, it's always a little bit like, man, do I have enough to talk about? Do I have enough content in my life? And I always end up having plenty. And today is no different. We were just kind of brainstorming some of the things that I should talk about. And I'm like, oh yeah, what about the neighbor? What about there's so many things that are always going on in everybody's life. And, you know, just when you think your life is boring, put a camera in front of your face and talk about it for 45 minutes and you'll realize it's actually not. So I'm going to start just by talking about the sweatshirt that I'm wearing because if you guys follow me on Instagram, you might know my friend Sarah Barron, and she is also like my stylist. She's really just my friend with good style who I make dress me. But she, a couple years ago, so she has two kids. They were littler then. She was about my age when this happened. She was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. And I mean, can you imagine having like a 4 and a 6-year-old, which I have now, being in your mid 30s, and she got diagnosed with late stage cancer too, which means that it had actually already spread to her lungs. I mean, you know, 20 years ago, this is a death sentence. She for a long time was on did chemo and they actually ended up giving her like an entire fake colon, which is amazing, that works just like the real one but doesn't have cancer. Now she's doing great and she's cancer free, and she started this nonprofit called World Class, and all the purchases go towards funding underinsured communities to get to get colonoscopies. And now people are getting colon cancer earlier than ever before. Colon cancer, rectal cancer. And so, you know, in the past, I don't think you even started getting colonoscopies until you were like 40 or 50, but some people should be getting them earlier, which is why you should always ask your doctor and help support nonprofits like this so that people in underinsured communities can also have access to all the life-saving preventions. Now, moving along. So I just got back from, I'm honestly still coming off of this, like up from it. It's always a jarring experience spending a lot of time with family for me. And I think as I've gotten a little older, I'm realizing some relationships, no matter how much work you do, no matter how many retreats you go to, no matter how much plant medicine you take, and I'm speaking from experience, you know, like I've done the Hoffman, I've done the Academy, and all of this is like trauma therapy. Now, I was not sexually abused. I was not... Big T, small t traumas can affect different people different ways. And I think a lot of times you feel like if you haven't gone through a major trauma, then you don't really have a reason to still be carrying your childhood around with you and still have it be affecting the way you interact in the world. And one of the things that I realized is my relationship with my parents mostly is just like they can get to me faster than anybody else. And I think that's true of a lot of relationships. Like you have that one person that they can say something and another person can say the same exact thing, but if they say it, it hurts you more. And so we went on this trip. This was a trip. You might have seen it on TikTok or Instagram because I was kind of following it. So I had an arrangement with the Ritz-Carlton yacht collection, which is basically a cruise. And I called it a yacht on TikTok just because it's called the yacht collection. And it went viral with people being like, it's not a yacht, it's a cruise. Like, it was amazing. Thank you for the engagement. But anyway, so it was supposed to be my whole family. So there's 5 siblings. My older brother, Pete, is married and has a daughter. So 3 kids, my 2 kids, and then their daughter. She's 2.5. No, she just turned 3. And my daughter's 4 and Remy's 6. So And then my parents. So my parents, my siblings, my brother's wife, and then Sophie's boyfriend, Michael. So Sophie has a boyfriend, Michael. This was our first time spending with him on a trip for sure, but it was our first time spending time with him like as for a sustained period of time. So that is always interesting. She's very happy. I have more to say on all of that. Olivia ended up getting pneumonia, which we all thought was fake for the longest time, except that she's like still sick. So it ended up being real. She ended up getting pneumonia and not being able to come. My brother Gus, he flew to Rhode Island. We were all leaving from Rhode Island together pretty much. I was meeting them from New York, but because I had a work trip right before. But my brother Gus flies to Rhode Island. Now, my parents were flying all of them to Puerto Rico to get on this boat. This trip was completely paid for him, including all the flights. He shows up and is like, do we need our passports for this? Mind you, we have had a group chat, which I have been like every day for the last 6 months, checking, asking people, do you want a massage on this day? What restaurant would you like to eat on this day? Make sure that your passport is valid for the next 6 months, because a lot of countries that you travel to, they don't let you in if your passport is going to expire within 6 months. It's just a rule for some countries. So we all needed to make sure that our passports were up to date. I had to get Remy's updated. Sophie had to go get a new passport. We all did these things, okay, to make sure that we were prepared. Gus had one person to worry about. It's always the single brother who showed up and he didn't have his passport. And it wasn't like he forgot it, because like I feel like, you forget things all the time. Damn it, I forgot my keys like at my house. But it was like he never had it. Like he never even tried, because he has been on tour with what's the band called? He's been on tour with 30 Seconds to Mars, which is Jared Leto's band, basically being like an executive assistant. And so he's been traveling all over the world. So they have his passport. And so he just never got it from them. So he did not come on the trip. So the thing is, this is also what I noticed. I count on my siblings to be buffers between me and my parents. Like, it's easier for me to be in my family dynamic when Gus and Olivia are there. So with them not being there, they really fucked me, because it made me have to talk a little bit more to both of my parents, which, by the way, I love my parents. My mom is very caring. Like, she really wants to help. Every night she's like, do you want to go to dinner? I can watch the kids. She's very helpful in that way. My dad doesn't like children. Like, he says he does. He doesn't. Okay. And he had 5 of them. And his biggest regret is not having more, which is very interesting. I think parents have like this delusional memory of raising their children. Like, and he's always like, when's Olivia going to have more kids? Like, are you going to have more kids? He wants us to have more kids. I think he has this idea. He likes procreating, like having more extensions of him, but he doesn't really want to be near them until they are fully functioning and have proven that they are valuable in the world in some way. And so this was what I grew up with. It was like, love is contingent on what are you bringing to the table? How fast can you run? Like, quite literally, he would line us up and make us run. And, I have so much compassion for him because I've done the work, and like his father was pretty abusive, and he's this way for a reason. It's not, and he loves us. He only wants us to be happy. But my God, like some of the things he says to me, one of the things that I think I've mentioned before is like every time I go out on a date, I don't tell my dad anything about like my dating life, because his first thing is always like, do you think they liked you? And it's such a hurtful thing for him not to be like, did you like them? Because he's like inexplicitly basically telling me that I need to convince people to like me. That's how I hear it. I don't know if that's necessarily what he means. And the thing is, like, I know where it's coming from too, because he's nervous that I'm going to be hurt. So his nervousness for me being hurt translates into him giving me no confidence that I can do it, that I can be in a relationship that's functional and not have to like trick somebody into liking me. Family dynamics are so weird, but one of the things that really killed me was just, okay, so obviously I'm traveling with my two kids. We're eating a lot of meals together, and my kids are kids. They're well behaved, but they're probably like on the. My son doesn't eat really, so anytime we're at a restaurant, he has anxiety around food, and so his behavior is already not the best. Like, he's squirming to get out of the seat, doesn't really want to be there. And then my daughter kind of looks at my son for her behavior cues. And anyway, my dad had zero patience for being at a table with them, and at one point he just like got up and left, which honestly is the best thing he could have done, probably. But for me, it hurt my feelings so badly. I feel like I'm going to cry, but I don't like, it doesn't, it's just interesting. Like, anybody else could do that, and I'd be like, thank God he's such a Debbie Downer. Anyway, I don't even want him here. But when it's your dad, and I feel like there's just so much of your self-worth wrapped up in what your parents think of you. And I don't know. It just really killed me that he can't just like be there and support, just be there in silent support. You know, like when you see that somebody's struggling, or that like this is not an easy thing to have kids on vacation, to be traveling with them. And obviously I'm doing it by myself, and like he can't even be bothered to pretend like he can bear to be around kids. It's a hard thing to explain. And you know, my niece was there as well, and she's also a 3-year-old, and they're dropping forks and they're, you know, spilling waters, and this just happens, but like he really can't handle it. And I remember my own childhood, and this is the other thing they say all the time too. They're like, oh, well, you kids never acted like that. You kids like you sat still and you just ate your food and you were always quiet. And honestly, we really were very good. And my mom always says like she would never have had 5 kids if any of her kids were not well behaved. We were very well behaved because we were terrified of my dad. Like you did not want to see that man mad, and he would flip off the handle like all the time if anything went wrong. So you didn't want to see that. Like you stayed in your place because you had to. And also being in a big family too, like I was the oldest girl, so I would help a lot. Like I would make sure Sophie's water wasn't near her because I didn't want her to spill her water because I didn't want to see my dad mad. So it's just like when you have a lot of siblings, there's more people to buffer, I think is what it is. And that's why Olivia and Gus screwed me, because I ended up having to like, and then the other thing he said to me, I hope my dad never listens. He won't listen to this. But the other thing he said to me was like, did you find anybody yet? Like, have you convinced anybody to like you yet? And I'm like, no, that's not my first goal. One of the things that I got out of the trip is that every summer I bring my kids to my parents' house, and I kind of like, I'm never really happy there. It's not like the dynamic that I like to be in, but I do it because I want my kids and my parents to have a relationship because they live across the country. And there's always like a lot of people coming in and out because that's how my mom likes to run her house. They have a lot of animals. I don't enjoy it. My kids don't like the dogs either. And I'm just not going to go this summer because I decided that I'm not going to do things to make other people happy anymore or to foster relationships between other people, because quite frankly, I think it's just too, I can't put everything on my own plate and take care of myself at the same time. I've tried it. It has not worked out for me very well over the past like few years. And I think now that my kids are a little bit older and I've experienced that, like, okay, when you first have kids, you feel like you need to foster relationships between your kids and other people. But I'm not going to do that anymore because I just don't want to. and I'm not going to go there over the summer because it's super expensive also to fly my kids out and me. You know, I rent a car. Obviously, I'm staying with my parents, but I'm still paying for my place in LA. It's like, it's just so many sacrifices that I make that I'm realizing, why do I do that? I also look at my ex-husband who's never flown with my kids by himself because he doesn't want to, because he's smart. Like, what he sets up his life in a way where it's like he has as little inconveniences around him as possible. And I've always been like, oh, that's selfish. But now I'm kind of looking at it as like, okay, I need to take a page out of that book. I don't know. Like, there's nothing impressive about putting so much on your own plate and then getting burned out from it. So, long story short, the vacation with my extended family was pretty hard for me. Also, Sophie's new boyfriend comes from a Mormon family. And I was reminded, not by him, like, he was actually a little embarrassed every time Sophie would say it, but Sophie would always be like, in Mormon culture, if the children like act up at all, they have to be pulled out of whatever the activity is. Or in Mormon culture, the kids never drop their knife, or the kids always have their shoes on, you know, things like that. Like, and I'm just like, I cannot wait for you to have children, because you just can't control a lot of their behavior sometimes. And the thing is, like, some of the behavior stuff is a work in progress. You're like, from moment to moment, it's not always going to be perfect. And they've gotten actually much better in certain ways. And in certain ways, actually, I think overall they've just gotten better. So I used to do this thing where she would just scream, like in restaurant. Like, she would scream. My children are, my mom even said it, like, from the day Remy was brought home from the hospital, she had never seen a baby who could just scream all day. Like, they're very strong-willed children. They just are, and they've always been that way. And my daughter used to do this thing where she would just scream. Like, and she did it because she knew that I didn't want her to do it in public, but she doesn't care about, like, my kids are not, we were afraid of strangers, and we didn't want to be talked to by other adults. My kids are not afraid of other adults. They're not afraid of strangers. They're not afraid of making a scene, which not every kid is like that. I just happen to get two of them that really are. And so Leigh doesn't do that anymore. She doesn't scream in public. So that is a win for me. Like, it might not look like it from the outside world because she still takes her shoes off at dinner, but like, she's not screaming. So for me, it feels like a win. But being on a vacation with my extended family, including my dad, who he doesn't like to travel, so he's already kind of on edge, and then he doesn't like to be around kids, and then kind of looks at me like I'm failing at parenting because I can't control my kids, is a really hard dynamic for me to be around. And therefore, I will not be putting myself in that situation any longer than I need to. I saw something when I got home from the cruise, and it was something some mom therapist, some parent therapist had posted that basically said, a lot of the stress, she was writing on her Instagram, and she said that I get a lot of notes from parents asking me, you know, what do I do about my kid? He does this, and how do I make my kid give his grandmother a hug? He won't. It's so embarrassing. And she says that a lot of the things people ask her are actually not questions about how can I make my kid better, but how can I make adults more comfortable with my kids? And that struck me so deeply, because it is true. Like, parenting my kids at home is so easy. When I go out into the world, you know, it's harder because you almost need to translate the children's behavior you need to make other grown-ups comfortable. Like, when my kids aren't nice to my mom, or not nice, but like they don't want to, you know, she'll come in the morning and they're still tired, and she doesn't know that they don't really want to talk that much at 8 a.m. when they're first waking up. I'm embarrassed because she's so excited to see them and they're not matching her excitement. And then I'm like, I feel uncomfortable. And I'm like, guys, look, like, grandma's here. She brought you toys. Don't you love the toys? Like, isn't that so nice? You know, and it's just so much, it's just so stressful. It really is, to try to make your kids behave in a way that makes other adults happy. And to a certain extent, I think there's things that can be avoided. My friend who came on the podcast, David Guillaume, he was like, my kids, I think he has 4 kids. Maybe he has 3. He has a lot of kids and they're little. And he's like, they've never been on an airplane. Why would I ever do that? And I'm like, fair. And I know his kids are very well behaved. They all have chores, and he's like a Kabbalah master, okay? But it is true. Like, there are certain things you can just avoid. I tend to be somebody who brings my kids everywhere and does everything with them. And I just suffer the consequence in whatever way because I like to do things and I feel guilty when I leave my kids behind. But also, like, I've had people make comments to me before. So after I reposted that, and this guy wrote to me, and he was nasty. And he was like, just so you know, not everybody enjoys being around kids. I didn't ask you to get knocked up. It's not I shouldn't have to sit next to somebody who's screaming on an airplane. Keep your kids at home. Other adults don't want to have to be disturbed when they're spending their hard money to have to be around you. Oh, and then he was like, and you ended up getting divorced. So now you want the world to have to pay for your mistakes. Talking about my children. This is what a guy said. So I could tell he was a little, first of all, I scrolled up a few times I scrolled up a little back and I saw that he was also like, oh, you're so hot. Oh, like he's mentally unstable. He likes me, he hates me. Like, anyway, but it's the thing is, what he said is what a lot of people feel and don't say. And I've had people, very well-meaning people who are close to me, also kind of inadvertently be like, I didn't, basically inadvertently say something along the lines of, you don't get a shortcut. We're not going to give you a break. No, like, having kids was your decision, so you should pay for it. But like, I don't ask for help. I don't ask for shortcuts. I don't ask to get extensions. It's not like mothers are asking for special privileges because we're in a time that's more difficult. But I think people need to be more sensitive to the fact that children are some of the most vulnerable population in society, just like old people are, just like people with special needs. And if there's ever a time in your life or somebody's life that you love who happens to be among the vulnerable population, I think you would want a little grace from the people that might be a little inconvenienced by it, you know? All the guys who I feel like are trying to pursue me right now are old. They're all like 55 and older, honestly. I'm 35. 35 to 45-year-olds are all married right now. I know. Literally. In my kids' classes, there are not a lot of divorced parents. But then when you start moving up into like the higher school grades, especially middle school, there's a lot more single parents. So I need to start hanging around the middle schools is basically what it comes down to. The point really is just, I don't really know if I have a point, but I did talk to this specialist the other day. He's an attachment specialist. I was on a podcast called I Wish You Knew. There was an attachment therapist specialist on there, and he was talking about how, the different types of attachment styles of men. And what I said to him was that there's a lot of older men that just are popping in my DMs, like older, like 55 and older. And I'm like, what is that? And he was like, it's very common because a lot of men who are avoidant attached spend a majority of their time on work because they're seeking dopamine, and the relationships that they do have are short because no woman can sustain the levels of dopamine that they need for long enough, so it ends up burning out after like 5 months. If they do get married to somebody, it's not a marriage where the people are growing together and close, and so they end up getting divorced. And so basically he was like, you should not date somebody that's 20 years older than you. And I was like, okay, I can do that, but there's really no good prospects my age. And he was saying, yes, it's true that the pickings are slimmer because if you're single in your 30s and 40s, like later 30s and 40s, it probably has to do with your attachment style. Like he's saying, if you're not paired up by then, it is because there's an attachment style issue. But that the issue could have been fixed. Like if you're getting mentorship around your attachment style, he says not therapy. He actually was like, therapy is not really the way to go, that he prefers more coaching or mentorship because they can get into more of attachment styles rather than, he seemed to think that therapy can be very feminizing and that a lot of men are not open to it. So learning what your attachment style is evidently is a way to become more functional in a relationship. This episode was very interesting because he talked all about dating styles, all about why people are single in their 30s and 40s, about, what type of dating strategies you should be adopting. And then also he talks about how long you should wait to be intimate, things like that. And the way he described it was all really science-backed. It was an episode on the podcast called I Wish You Knew. And obviously, if you search my name, I was the guest. So it was fun. And I learned a lot from that. So I'm just going to redirect you right over there for more on that. I think I'm a combination. I can be avoidant and I can be anxious attached. So, which also I've realized I need to get a different dating app because Raya, I think people on Raya are already the chances of me finding somebody who doesn't consider themselves special, which is also something to avoid, is slim because Raya's exclusive and it's like a club you have to be let in. So a lot of people there are looking for shiny things and maybe not anything with depth. Paul was, in retrospect, might have been the most wild of them all, because wild in a way of, I think he had way more issues than were visible. I think I consider myself somebody who's pretty good at being able to tell if someone's fucked up or not. And you might be like, no, Aurora, you dated a sociopath. Remember the guy with the family? Yes, that's true. But I knew he was crazy. I was having fun. He was love bombing me and I just went with it. Paul, I actually thought he was normal. And now in retrospect, when I think about, he love bombed me too, because we had like a 3-month relationship. He was ready to move my family to Florida. We had like these plans. He had plans. He was like looking over my divorce contract to see when what stipulations there were. He was coming up with a strategy to try to get my ex-husband to move to Florida. He was flying me out to Boston every single weekend pretty much. And then it was like he just shut off. And I think that's actually what I think that's called avoidant attachment, because it's when, they're getting the dopamine rush, everything's new and shiny. And then I'm not able to give him that same hit of dopamine anymore. So there's nothing left for them. They need to find something new and shiny. And Sophie, my sister, actually saw the new and shiny because she bumped into him at a bar. And she said she was shiny with a lot of makeup. And somebody did DM me and ask me about this guy who is like a spiritual leader who I know. And he's somebody who I know and somebody who I had a meeting with, like a work meeting with. It was because I was interested in what he was talking about and I was maybe going to potentially have him on the podcast. I ended up not having him on the podcast. When I went out met him for lunch, became clear to me very soon, very quickly, that that this was a date that I had not agreed to. And during that lunch, he asked me if my boobs were real. He asked me if I've had any work done. Sometimes when people ask, are so off guard, or sometimes when people are so off kilter like that, it's so funny to me that I wasn't even offended. And I just answered him honestly, because I was just like, you're crazy. I don't know. For some reason, I didn't get up and walk out. I stayed and I was like, what's this guy going to ask me next? This is a crazy person. Anyway, somebody DM'd me on Instagram and they were like, my friend went out with him and she found him to be like so pervy and so aggressive with his questions and like trying to get sexual really quickly. And she's like, she was so, what's the word I'm looking for? She was so surprised by this because he is a man who is known to be a spiritual person. And I feel like that's just one like type of guy that I now need to just like completely avoid off the list. It's these guys who are morally superior. And sometimes they're heading some kind of a, I mean, not a cult, but I found like yoga instructors, retreat instructors, any man who thinks that he has some kind of spiritual knowledge to impart on the masses freaks me out, because they usually end up being some of the most inappropriate I've found. I dated one other guy who was also he was like a yogi plant medicine type guy, and just ended up being more full of shit than anybody else. So that's one type of guy I'm not dating anymore. And then I'm also not dating guys that are older. I need the coach the attachment coach that I talked to the other day said that I need to stick to guys who are under 45. Like 45 is like 10 years is enough of a difference. And then guys who can't have an open conversation right off the bat about where they are where they want the direction they want to be heading in their relationships, they also are a hard no. So TBD. I actually have a date on Thursday. So I met this guy in Raya. He has a kid. He has a little baby, but he's not married and he never was, which is interesting. That's a new one. I've never dated anybody with a baby. Most people with babies are not divorced yet. Even I waited. That's hard. You don't care. They could be anybody as long as there's somebody there to help you. You just need a set of hands. But he's 50-50, and I don't know. We'll see. So since the year is coming to an end, I thought maybe we could just do a little recap of Aurora's dating history this year. If you have not listened to all my episodes since the beginning of the year, then you may have missed one, and that is a shame. You need to go back and listen, because I have learned some lessons, and I think this next year, also according to my astrologist, this next year is going to be a great one. I think I know what to avoid now, and I think that because I've gotten a taste of all the things that you should run very far from when dating. The year started out with a bang. The very first person I dated in December 2024 was the con man. Do we remember the con man, everybody? He was the one who actually had a family. He was the one who was trying to rent a house near me while his wife and children lived like 20 miles south. He was also a drug addict. Later found that out as well, had some addiction things that he was hiding, and the family he was hiding. So that ended up being a hard pass. And then soon after con man, not really dating, more like I thought maybe we were dating, and I think he was just playing me, but a famous person who ended up being a real fuckboy. And he will go unnamed, but he's still single because he's still just sleeping around. You know, there were some people sprinkled in there. There was the guy who wanted me to come to Hawaii but wouldn't let me get my own hotel room even though I had just met him. There was also the famous guy who stood me up for the famous actress, courtside seats. I ended up seeing them on Getty Images. So those are people just sprinkled in. Then I started seriously dating guy with the famous ex-fiance. He was an interesting one. He almost got me that one. He really did. He looked the most normal, and comparatively, well, to con man, he was more normal than that. He did not have any drug problems. He did not have a family. He was not married. He did have kids, but like he told me about them. And yeah, that one was interesting. What I think I learned about that one is you just really don't know somebody until you see them in a variety of situations. You don't know how fragile someone's ego is, how resilient they are, how much they know themselves and what they actually want, unless you see them over a variety of situations, which can only really happen if you're with someone for about 3 months. I think they call it 3 cups of tea. Somebody told me that the other day. It's called 3 cups. Yeah, somebody told me that the other day. It's called 3 cups of tea, that you need to see them over 3 cups of tea. I don't know. It's an expression. But he ended up being not knowing at all what he wanted. And we could not be together because what he thought he wanted, which is a podcaster who, talks about relationships. Turns out he didn't want that. And that is totally fine because I don't need a washed up 55-year-old man anyway. So there was him. And then after him came Clicky Heel Guy, and he was sweet. He was. What I learned about that one is don't have sex with somebody to make them happy because you feel bad. That was kind of a lesson that I really should already have known. I was weak-willed and I paid the price for it because we just had no connection and there was no denying it at that point. I think with that one too, I think what I also learned is that they can have everything on paper and there still can be no chemistry. He had a great job. He was really sweet. He was super smart. And the situation was kind of perfect in terms of like that he had a kid and all of that, but you just can't force chemistry. And then I think I was resenting him because I didn't like him. I don't know. I don't know. That one did not work out either. But that was the lesson learned there. All the best to him. There was then sprinkled in there was this guy who I went on like 3 dates with. He was 7 feet tall, like so tall. And he was one of those guys that, guys that try to flirt with you by kind of like starting fights. It's really a very childish thing to do. But I would be like, oh, sorry, I can't hang out this weekend because I have something to do. And he'd be like, oh, too good for me. I get it. Like, you got to do your fancy stuff, things like that. And so I learned that I really need to be somebody who's secure and does not flirt by starting fights. That guy was also a hard pass. He still texts me and is like, I can't believe you're mad at me, or I can't believe you won't talk to me anymore because you're mad at me. Wow, so dramatic. Like, okay. Anyway, that one was a hard pass. Then there was a guy who played for the Yankees that I was talking to for a minute who was getting very disturbed every time I asked him about, what happened was one of my friends was like, oh, he's still with his baby mama. And I asked him about it and he was very suspicious and then got very angry that I asked him about it. So I could just tell by the way he dealt with conflict the way that he dealt with me asking a pretty valid, normal question that I would not be able to spend a lifetime with somebody like that. So we pivoted there as well. Same thing happened with the singer that I was going to meet in New York. I was so busy. I was there on an Ulta trip and I couldn't end up meeting up with him. I said to him, sorry, I don't think it's going to happen this trip. If you're ever in LA, let me know. And his response was just so telling. He was like, no, I don't think so. I don't like LA. I don't like any of the people that live in LA. It was something along those lines of like, everybody in LA is so vapid and like I'm way too deep for that. That's why I live in Nashville and strum my guitar. I'm like, okay, cool. You just because you feel rejected, you have to insult me and everybody that lives where I live. Great. Have a great day. That's where I'm at now. Now I'm going to go on a date with the guy with the baby and I'll have to ask him if he minds being anonymous on my podcast. Since I've already started talking about him. So we'll see. I went on one date with this old comedian. He's actually still a comedian, but he's old. Too old for me. So sweet, though. And we actually ran into Kevin Hart while we were there, I was starstruck. Because I think he's so smart and, like, so funny. Kevin Hart's probably one of my favorite comedians. But he's married with kids, so he was not my option that day. It was the other one, and he's too old for me. I don't know. Dating has been interesting. It's been a lot of content, and I hope you guys have had as much fun as I have. So sign off to my dating life of 2024. I am not sad to see it go. I hope you guys have been as entertained as I have, and I'm looking forward to sharing some fun times and hopefully, more uplifting experiences in 2025 in the dating world. Maybe I'll have some pearls of wisdom for you guys because I know I have been lacking in that department.